Hello everyone and welcome to Imbibe Live Online, part of Global Bar Week. I'm Robyn Black, editor of Imbibe UK, and I'm delighted to welcome back Jonny Jones, Director of Client Services at insight firm CGA. Jonny first joined us back in June at Imbibe Live Online then, where we explored some emerging consumer trends. I've actually written down here that I'm really looking forward to hearing what's happened, but given recent events, am I looking forward to it, Jonny? I don't know what the stats are going to be like, but we'll find out how things have been evolving. Before we get started, a quick reminder that this is live and we are taking questions throughout. So if you've got any questions you want to ask, please keep them coming in by entering them into the box on the right of the screen. I'm going to now hand over to Jonny. I'm going to turn off my camera and microphone. And Jonny, over to you.
Cool, I'll just share my screen. Thanks, Robyn, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to spend the next 20 minutes or so just talking you through some of the key trends that we've seen since the market reopened on the 4th of July. So I'll be setting the scene with a brief update on the market in general, and then we'll move on to focus on the dynamics of consumer demand. So I'll be covering sentiment towards the market post-lockdown, the key topic of consumer confidence, which has been a bit of a roller coaster over the last 3 months, how consumers are engaging with the market, and finally what to expect next as we move into the winter months and the run-up to Christmas. So kicking off with the market context. And as of the end of September, just over 80% of on-trade outlets have reopened, equating to just over 90,000 sites, but with just under 25,000 sites yet to return. We have seen steady growth in that number since the lockdown restrictions were lifted on the 4th of July, but it is starting to plateau. So it was 62% at the end of July and then 76% at the end of August. As you can see, pubs have recovered fastest, with restaurants still lagging behind. But it's the late night market which has been the hardest hit by trading restrictions, and where the greatest proportion of sites still remain closed. There are regional variations in that as well, and when we look at the major cities, it's been the northwest that has been the fastest to reopen, though after last night's announcements we'll obviously be seeing the numbers in Liverpool move backwards significantly. But up to now it's been London that's been the worst affected, and that's because so much trade comes from tourism and business in London, up to 40% for some operators. So many have made that tough decision not to reopen yet. We've been doing a lot of research with operator business leaders throughout the pandemic, and in our latest survey, almost 4 in 10 are telling us that some of their sites will remain permanently closed, compared to more like 3 in 10 at the beginning of lockdown. And on average, those leaders who are predicting site closures estimate that around 1 in 7 of their sites will remain closed for good. Which when we factor in those who aren't predicting permanent closures equates to around an 8% contraction in the market, but with 21% still undecided on how many sites they might close, we could yet see that number increase. And those are managed operators who've typically fared better than free trade, so we'd be expecting somewhere in the region of 10% contraction in the total number of licensed premises. Having said that, there are still operators who are pushing ahead with expansion of their estates, and are planning on opening new sites in 2020. So more than a third are planning on opening at least one site, and with 15% planning on opening more than one across the remainder of the year. So there is still some positivity in the market. Looking at the impacts that all of that's had on drink sales since the market reopened using our on-premise measurement service, we can see that in the 8 weeks to the 5th of September, total drink sales were down almost 40% versus the equivalent period in 2019. And that is predominantly driven by distribution, with 23% of outlets yet to return at that point. But sales per site also down around 21%, as government regulations have put restrictions on trading capacity, and consumer confidence has no doubt taken a hit as well. So overall, in those 8 weeks alone, the on-trade drinks market has lost 1.9 billion in revenue from drinks, with the average site now taking just over £1,000 less per week in drink sales than they were last year. So as we've already seen from the outlet openings, it's pubs that have been fastest to come back to market, and this is reflected in their total sales performance as well. So restaurants have been slower to return and have seen mixed fortunes on reopening, with casual dining seeing heavy rate of sale decline, whilst traditional restaurants have fared better. But it's the late night market which is the hardest hit sector, as trading restrictions have hit their operating model hardest. particularly nightclubs, but also late night bars. So for drink suppliers, adapting to the new shape of the market will be key to a successful recovery, particularly those for whom the late night market has traditionally been their heartland. And we can see this played out in the category numbers as well, where beer has significantly outperformed spirits due to its strength in pubs. So the average site's beer sales are back up to 85% of pre-COVID levels, compared to 73% for spirits. So with sales shifting to earlier day parts and week parts, in part driven by Eat Out to Help Out, beer and cider have benefited ahead of the other drink sectors. And this has driven significant share gains for beer at the expense of spirits and to a lesser extent soft drinks. With curfew now shifting people into those earlier day parts and effectively placing a pause on late night occasions, spirits will need to tap into the lower tempo occasions in order to compete. So a good finished drinks and cocktail strategy has never been more important to spirit suppliers, despite the operational challenges that have made that more difficult. Looking at the more recent sales trends using our Coffee Peach business tracker, so this tracks the sales of 64 managed retailers and represents about 9 billion in annual spend in a typical year. And we can see that whilst like-for-like sales were recovering throughout July and August, helped by the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, this has fallen back since the 10 PM curfew was put in place. Though it's important to note that we have seen improvement in the weekend just gone. So some operators are performing well ahead of this, particularly some of the food-led estates, but there is no doubt that there's still plenty of challenges ahead. And operator leaders are concerned about consumers avoiding city centres, partly driven by the vast increase in home working. So 55% of us are now working from home, more than half of whom did so rarely or never before the pandemic, and 2/3 of whom used to eat or drink out at least once a week in venues near their workplace. So leaders are also concerned about squeezed disposable incomes, and rightly so, with consumers worried about their financial prospects and also about their job security. But the biggest challenge faced by the market is consumer confidence. It's been fickle since the market reopened, and we'll come on to look at that in more detail. So moving on to consumers and how they've been behaving since the market reopened. Well, to date, more than 2/3 of us have been back out into trade for at least one occasion since the 4th of July. And we've seen steady growth in that number each fortnight, although like the outlet openings, that is now starting to plateau. And the good news is that on the whole, their expectations have either been met or exceeded, with only 4% saying that their trips into trade have been worse than they expected. So the market's clearly responded well to the new trading conditions, but there's still a marketing job to do to get the remaining consumers back out to see this. And when they are out, consumers' drinking habits have remained relatively unchanged, with 7 in 10 drinking the same number of serves or more than usual, and only 29% drinking less. We saw many consumers moderating their alcohol intake during lockdown, but this trend is much less pronounced since the market has reopened. So it's no surprise really to see that it's the younger demographic that returned first, with more than half returning in the first 10 days. There was definitely a lot of pent-up demand from younger consumers during lockdown, with many returning in the first weekend of reopening. But encouragingly, we're now seeing the over 35s catching up as well, with more than 6 in 10 having been out and have made at least one trip into trade. In terms of where they're going to, it's pubs and restaurants which have seen the greatest proportion of previous visitors returning, with bars, particularly late night bars, falling significantly behind. And this is in part due to the avoidance of city centres where these outlet types are more prevalent, but also because consumers are looking for less busy environments where social distancing and other safety measures are easier to implement. We see the same reasoning for those who haven't been back out yet, with almost half saying that they don't feel safe being in close proximity to others. Financial constraints are still a concern, but not feeling safe is the key reason that some consumers have not been back out. And again, I think this highlights the need for strong marketing campaigns to communicate the measures that have been put in place, and to combat the unfounded government narrative that hospitality is to blame for rising infection rates, when in fact less than 5% of cases since the market reopened can be linked to the industry, according to the government's own data. Concerns around health have been dropping prior to the implementation of the Rule of 6 and curfew measures, though they have increased again. So whilst consumers remain concerned about the long-term financial positions and their job security, we need to look beyond just safety and give consumers more reasons to come into venues, and we'll go on to look at that in more detail as well. And it's no surprise, given the numbers reported in the press every day, that we're also seeing an increase in those concerned about a second wave of the virus. So we need to work harder than ever to drive consumer confidence to come out into safe environments that we have created in our venues. And as I mentioned earlier, consumer confidence is extremely fickle right now. We've seen big swings driven by different initiatives and government-imposed trading restrictions. This all started really with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which more than half of us took advantage of throughout August. Around about 40% of whom visited for the first time since the end of lockdown. So as well as bringing more consumers back out into the market, the scheme also drove increased frequency of visit, with more than half of those that used the scheme visiting the trade more than they expected to. And most importantly, it had a big impact on consumer confidence, with more than half of those who visited the market for the first time because of the scheme saying it made them more confident, and only 3% saying that it made them less confident. And overall, more than 8 in 10 consumers who used the scheme saying that the experience had reassured them enough to visit again. So a big impact on consumer confidence and a key driver of repeat visits into trade. So it's no surprise then that the scheme drove increased sales, and that's not just for food, but for drinks as well. So this is taken from our daily drinks recovery tracker, and it shows the sales on Monday to Wednesday in the first 2 weeks of August compared to the last 2 weeks in July. And as you can see, all drinks categories benefited significantly from the scheme, not just soft drinks, which were included in the deals, but liquor sales as well. And we didn't see any drop off in sales at the weekend, which suggests that these visits were incremental to the normal visits into trade. But then came the rule of 6, and that had almost the exact opposite effect on consumer confidence. So with nearly a third of consumers saying that they felt less confident to visit the on-trade based on the new regulations. Views were mixed with regards to whether or not the regulations were the right course of action, with almost a quarter saying it seemed drastic and unnecessary, but nearly 3 in 10 saying that it didn't go far enough. And many stated that they would alter their plans based on those new regulations, significantly impacting frequency of visit. So a quarter said they wouldn't be making plans to go out in the near future, and 1 in 10 said that they had cancelled plans based on those regulations. However, another 1 in 10 did say that they would ignore the regulations and go ahead with their plans regardless. And again, probably no surprise to see that it was the under 35s who drove that, where that number rises to over a quarter. And then on the 21st of September, the government announced that they were introducing the 10 p.m. curfew from the evening of the 24th. We surveyed consumers shortly after that announcement and saw that it had a further negative impact on consumer confidence. So 28% said they're now less confident to go into pubs, bars or restaurants, compared to 15% who felt more confident. So a net impact there of minus 13%. For those who are less confident, that's because they feel that cases are increasing and that a second wave is coming, but also because they don't believe the restrictions will be followed or will stop the spread of the virus. But I think most importantly, they don't think that hospitality venues are safe places to be. Again, highlighting the need for the marketing job really that's required in order to show consumers how safe our venues are and how little they've actually contributed to transmission. Again, younger consumers are less affected, with more than 3/4 saying that they're as confident, if not more so, whilst a third of over 55s feel less confident to visit the market. For those who do feel more confident, it's not because of the curfew. It's more about the enforced table service and staff wearing PPE, helping to stop transmission in venues. Encouragingly for many, it's because they recognise that venues have already done a great job of putting precautions in place to make them feel safe, a message we need to keep communicating to all consumers. So what do consumers want from their post-lockdown visits into trade, and how can we deliver on those new requirements? Well, first and foremost, they want to feel safe, with 2/3 saying that this is more important to them than having a normal on-trade experience. However, that was 71% in June, and as consumers get used to coming back out, they're expecting more from their on-trade visits. So back in July, the requirements were all about hygiene and cleanliness levels, but that's now falling away to some degree, falling down the list. And the things which contribute to a high quality experience, such as the quality of food and drink, service and atmosphere, are all becoming more important. So it's important that we strike the right balance between safety and experience in order to meet the new consumer expectations. And that's clearly been a challenge, because over time what we've seen is that net promoter scores are decreasing as consumer expectations for experience rises. Consumers have been satisfied with their interactions with staff, but less so with the atmosphere in venues, which a quarter say is now worse than it was before lockdown. So as time goes on, having done a great job in making consumers feel safe, operators now need to start getting back to providing the great experiences that consumers have become used to from their visits into trade. And suppliers need to be thinking about how they can support their customers to deliver that. Operators know this, as it was cited as the biggest challenge amongst operator business leaders. There's no doubt that it's tougher than ever to deliver on these demands, but as an industry, we need to work together to meet them once again. So what contributes to a good experience in the post-lockdown on trade? Well, for the most part, consumers are still choosing safety over excitement, but this is not the case across the board. They want quieter, lower tempo occasions and will choose familiar venues over something new and different. And they are also happier in smaller groups. However, they really want what we do best, which is hospitality delivered by great people. So whilst technology definitely has its place in the new environment, it's important that we don't forget what hospitality is all about. This is evidenced in the changes to how people want to see menus. Before venues reopened, consumers told us that they wanted to see menus on mobile apps or laminated menus that were cleaned between uses. However, 2 months on, and this has fallen away to some degree, and consumers would rather use single-use paper or just traditional menus. Unsurprisingly, it's the younger demographic who are most comfortable with apps, and the older demographic who want those traditional menus, and I think we need to be offering both. These dynamics are particularly important when we look at how consumers want to order their drinks. So again, apps are important, particularly for younger consumers, but not as important as they stated they were pre-lockdown, with table service now slightly ahead. Again, it's a balance really between safety and experience and affording consumers the choice of what suits them is the best way to go. I think apps present another challenge for suppliers as well in ensuring visibility of their brands and their finished drink serves, with some operators taking an almost Amazon style approach to this and selling the top listings within each category for a price. But whatever the mechanic, with no ordering at the bar, it's important that suppliers tap into the various options and find a way to drive trade up, as this has great benefits to both supplier and operator. Bartenders have previously been able to influence the upsell or category choices for over 70% of drinks. Without that intervention, we need to think about how we can encourage that trade up. And another big trend we saw during lockdown was delivery, with more than a quarter of consumers using this for the first time or more frequently than usual, driving significant growth for that channel. And back then, consumers were telling us that they wanted the full food and drink menu and were interested in alcohol delivery. And we've seen the trend continue, the delivery trend continue post-lockdown, but perhaps not enough is being made of the opportunity for drinks, with 3 in 10 having ordered delivery from pubs, bars or restaurants, but only 6% including alcohol, potentially driven by a lack of availability of good finished drink solutions. However, those numbers do vary greatly by age group and location of where the consumers live. So 1 in 6 18 to 30-year-olds who live in city centres have ordered alcohol delivery from on-trade outlets. So with city centre venues hardest hit by the trading restrictions, this could still be a great way to supplement in outlet sales and drive further recovery for those sites. And then finally, we take a look at what's next now that curfew looks set to be in place for the medium term at least, and what to expect over Christmas. So there's no doubt that the curfew has dealt a further blow to the industry. Nearly a third are predicting reduced frequency of visit, and 1 in 5 telling us that they'll be avoiding the sector altogether. But again, this varies by age group, and encouragingly, many consumers say that the curfew will not impact their frequency of visiting the on-trade. Particularly the 18 to 34-year-olds, again, of whom 57% will go out either as frequently or more frequently than before the restrictions came in. So the younger demographic will continue to be key, and they're going to grow in importance once again. But across all consumers, more than half say that the curfew will impact their typical plans. So of those who would typically be out after 8 p.m, a quarter will now go out earlier for the same length of visit. 43% will still go out, but they'll reduce their dwell time. And a third will stop going out for the late evening occasion altogether, which deals a further blow to the late night market. As you would expect, bars, but also pubs will be worst hit, with 30% of previous visitors to those sectors now less likely to visit because of the restrictions. And city centres will again be the worst affected locations. With reduced dwell time, consumers are much more likely to stay local. Another blow for city centre focused operators who've already seen significant challenges in attracting consumers back into their venues. And interestingly, it doesn't appear that the measures will be effective in reducing transmission of the virus, as a third of consumers are telling us that they will continue to socialise post 10 p.m. in homes, in their own home or in their friends' homes with their own friends. And the measures are likely to drive further shifts towards earlier weekdays, as well as earlier day parts, with 4 in 10 of those who typically go out on a Saturday now less likely to do so, further highlighting the importance of a drink strategy that works well in lower tempo occasions. The younger demographic, again, are more resilient to the change in regulations, but the impact is felt across the board. Although, again, there is a core consumer set who are undeterred and are just as likely or even more likely to go out on Saturdays. We need to ensure that we're attracting those consumers whilst also working to change the minds of those who've been put off by the regulations. So while spend on hospitality visits does look set to take a hit, encouragingly half of consumers say they will spend the same as they did previously, a total of 15 per head per visit on drinks. But with clear changes to consumer engagement, we need to find new ways to interrupt the path to purchase and encourage trade up to drive those numbers upwards. Looking forward to Christmas, just taking some of the headlines from our pre-Christmas report. Only 1 in 4 consumers are telling us that they're confident about festive visits into trade. So operators and suppliers need to work together to drive those numbers with messages on both safety and experience. Again, the younger consumers are more confident, but there's still plenty of work to do between now and the end of the year to drive that upwards as well. But encouragingly, again, we see that the core on-trade consumer is feeling much more confident than average. So 43% of those who previously went out at least weekly over Christmas, they're confident to return again this year, compared to only 14% of those who were infrequent festive visitors in previous years. A good sign that we could still have a relatively strong Christmas and use the festive period to drive further market recovery. But it will no doubt be a challenge, as 45% say they will go out less frequently than last year, and only 12% will go out more, although this does rise again for the 18 to 34-year-olds, up to 27%. But there's still time to convince them otherwise, and we can take some clues on how to do this by asking those who do intend to go out more why that is. And the treat occasion comes through really strongly here, with consumers needing this more than ever after a tough year and a feeling of wanting to make up for lost time. This will also mean higher spend for some and purchasing more expensive drinks, so ensuring a strong offer across the price ladder is again important. And as we saw earlier, consumers increasingly want experience, and Christmas is a key time of year for this. So we need to highlight the great experiences that the trade has to offer in our marcoms in order to bring consumers back out into the market. In fact, over a third of those planning to scale back their on-trade engagement this year say that this is because they don't think the experience will be the same. So the top answer was obviously risk of COVID at 60%, but that not feeling the experience being the same was second at 37%. So we really need to work hard to convince them otherwise and change their minds over the next few months. So to sum up, as we've seen, consumer confidence is fickle, and it's seen peaks and troughs based on different initiatives and regulations. With seemingly little support coming from the government now on this, we need to work together as an industry to rebuild after recent setbacks. There's still very engaged core consumer who are confident in the market and visiting as frequently, if not more so than before. However, they're doing this in different outlets for different occasions, and understanding what that means for your business is going to be key to success. And finally, we need to strike a balance between safety and experience. Experience is what the hospitality market does best, and is becoming increasingly important again to consumers the more they visit the trade. Safety is still paramount, but we need to get back to delivering fantastic experiences as well, particularly over Christmas when consumers are looking to treat themselves after a challenging year. Okay, thank you. You're on mute, Robyn.
Having promised I wouldn't do that, I did. Thank you so much for that. There's a lot of stats there. That was a lot of information. So it might be worth flagging to anyone watching that all of these sessions are available on demand. So if you want to watch that again, if you missed any of the stats that you want to take down, then you can go to the full program and watch it after this is finished. We're open for questions. I've got a few of my own to ask as well. One of the things that I picked up on was that bars and restaurants are lagging behind pubs in terms of reopening. Why is that, do we think?
I think bars have been hit harder by the regulations, well, particularly now with the curfew, but they tend to be more predominantly in city centres as well, and consumers have been staying local since lockdown. People have been avoiding using public transport. I think restaurants is probably different. It's probably more about operational challenges of running a kitchen with social distancing in place. But that's obviously been tough, and so some restaurants have taken the choice not to reopen just yet.
And in terms of the closures that we're seeing, are they, as we'd imagine, happening mostly in city centres, or is the spread of hospitality closures more even than that geographically?
It does seem to be more focused in city centres at the moment, yeah. I think, like I say, consumers are staying local more so, and local pubs in particular have become more of a hub for the local community. So yeah, I think it'll be city centres that are hardest hit. I think in part as well, it's about just market shakeout, which was happening in some segments of the market before lockdown. So casual dining, for example, there's been a lot of noise in the trade press about potential oversaturation of that marketplace. Those outlets tend to be focused in city centres, and some of those operators were struggling before the pandemic began.
Yeah. And the Eat Out to Help numbers were really interesting and really encouraging when it was happening, obviously before we got new legislation in. But what I think the new figures show from today is that it was food-led outlets that benefited the most from that, perhaps unsurprisingly. But if you're a wet-led venue or a bar, do you think in the current climate and ongoing that you would now need to seriously consider looking at offering some sort of food?
I think potentially, yeah. I think food has been a big driver of visit, particularly over August, and it was definitely the food-led outlets or those with a blended offer that performed best over that period of time, and we have started to see that happening as well. I think even some of the more traditional late night outlets, when we've presented some of these slides before, people have been surprised to see the number of nightclubs that have actually reopened. They've not really reopened as nightclubs. They've flexed their offer. They've brought tables in and introduced table service and potentially some food sales as well. So yeah, I think operators do need to be looking at that if they're not already.
One of the questions we've just had in is about looking at other markets. So can we take knowledge from other markets and what they've done? Or are consumers in the UK reacting differently to consumers in other markets?
We do a lot of research in the States, but it varies very, very wildly by state, to be honest. And consumer confidence and consumer interaction with the market does seem to have varied based on government regulations. So as we saw in the confidence piece there, Eat Out to Help Out drove confidence massively, but then Rule of Six has taken a hit on that, and curfew further. So whilst we do a lot of research in other markets, it is quite difficult to compare and contrast because the regulations are very different.
And looking at the Christmas stats, are you seeing operators, any evidence from operators or consumers looking at pre-booking? Because normally we'd be full into pre-booking season now for Christmas time. Are people looking to do that, or are we just so uncertain with what the rules are going to be that you're seeing operators not rolling out those kinds of marketing campaigns?
Yeah, but pre-booking in general has just become a lot more important. So for a lot of people, about 2/3 of people have pre-booked a visit already. And for around about 30% of people, every visit they've made since lockdown has been pre-booked. So I think that does create another opportunity, particularly for drink suppliers. It's another touch point with the consumer where they can interrupt that path to purchase and potentially pre-sell them drinks before they even arrive at the venue.
And we just had another question in about if the decrease in on-trade consumption is being compensated for by an increase in off-trade consumption. I know you're on-trade data specialist, but I don't know if you've got any insight on that.
Yeah, well, we're strategically partnered with Nielsen, so we have done some work with them, particularly during lockdown, which showed that, yeah, a significant proportion of the lost sales from on-trade had been picked up through off-trade. But not enough to keep total trade at a flat level. Although interestingly, that wasn't the case for wine. Pretty much all the wine sales that were lost from on-trade were picked up in off-trade and some.
So it's quite different depending on categories.
Yeah, exactly. So for beer, for example, you'd be looking at more like 30%.
And the rise you mentioned as well in soft drink sales that was happening or is happening in on-trade venues, is that because of the shift to daytime occasions, do you think? Or is the mix of people going and people taking, is it more family visits?
I think it's both of those things, really. You're right, it's lower tempo occasions and having family visits as opposed to groups of friends meeting up for an alcoholic drink. I think soft drinks were also included in the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. And obviously we've seen the VAT cut on soft drinks as well, which has benefited the category. I think what we really need from government now is to see that VAT cut on liquor as well.
And in terms of sort of government or messages to government, I mean, the stats that we know about transmissions happening in hospitality, which is that they're very low numbers of COVID transmissions happening in hospitality. But the consumer figures that you showed, it feels like that message isn't cutting through to drinkers.
Exactly, yeah. I think that the government's own figures show that less than 5% of cases are directly linked to a hospitality venue. I think as an industry, we probably need to be making more of those messages in our communications to consumers. Venues have done fantastic jobs of making sure that their outlets are COVID safe, and there has been very little transmission in the hospitality market. But I think we're probably not shouting loud enough about that. And when that's lost in the noise of daily communications about cases going up, then it's tough.
Yeah. And we haven't had any more questions coming in, so I might wrap up with this final one from me, which is a bit wider. One of the things in your business leaders survey, one of the challenges that was cited was an increasing focus on diversity, which they were looking at. Are things like sustainability and diversity still sort of in the mix for consumers from the research that you're seeing, or has it just been superseded by more immediate concerns around health and safety and COVID?
And I think everything's taken a bit of a step back to safety around COVID. But yeah, we definitely are still seeing those things. The same trends that we saw pre-lockdown is consumers looking for more environmentally responsible brands, looking for more brands that support diversity and more ethics considerations, really. So yeah, we are expecting that to continue, and it is coming through in the numbers, but everything has been slightly dampened by the increased focus on safety.
Okay. Actually, I have had a last minute, one more question before I wrap it up. Do you think that sales on drinks is now not the right trigger for consumers? Is it more about promoting safe and special experiences?
Yeah, I think from an operator perspective, you know, your outlets have been closed for 3 months, and you're now trading at reduced capacity. I think cutting your prices is not the way to go. What we have seen in the past, and we're continuing to see, is that consumers are willing to spend more if the quality of the offer is right, and ultimately that's what's going to put more cash in your till and more profit in your pocket. So yeah, we get asked a lot about price at the moment, but I definitely wouldn't be going down. I'd be holding.
Okay. Thank you ever so much, Jonny. Thanks for everyone who sent questions, and I'm sorry I didn't get around to answering them all. So just thank you once again for watching. Thank you, Jonny, for your time and expertise. Really appreciate it. It's always really interesting. Just to say again that this session, like all the others, will be available to watch on demand. Don't forget, we've got full week content, so keep checking in. And thank you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Robyn.
Bye.